Hey, what's up guys, my name is Ben. Welcome to the Swanky Cat Productions channel where I put one new video out every week. So if you like what you see here today, make sure you hit that subscribe button, click the bell after you subscribe. That way it'll let you know anytime that I put one of these videos out. This is my 2021 Tenere 700 and this bike is by far the most uncomfortable motorcycle that I own. Now, the two major things that make this bike uncomfortable are the seat and these ridiculously straight bars. Now what I'm hopefully going to be fixing today is those handlebars. The seat I actually did order a replacement for. That seat is, I think, on like a 10 to 12 week lead time. So I have two main issues with this seat, and that's one, that it's just not all that comfortable. If you're only going to ride the bike for 2 or 3 hours, probably not going to be that big of a deal. But if you're like me and need to ride about an hour to get to your trails, and then you want to ride around on those trails for like 3 hours, and then you still have to get back home, by the time you get to the part where you're trying to get back home, this seat is just not really a nice place to be. Now the other bike that I've got in the garage is a 2022 KLR 650, and that bike I think actually has a relatively similar seat height to the Tenere 700. But the issue with the Tenere is not so much the height of the seat, but actually the width. Now that might sound kind of strange, but basically the thinnest portion here is really pretty wide. I just kind of end up losing some of my inseam height because I have to kind of keep my legs out to the side so much. I've got the option to either tiptoe on my left or tiptoe on my right. If I was to try to get both feet on the ground, I mean, I'm barely getting the ground at all. And I'm not ashamed to admit this definitely makes a bike more intimidating to ride. I don't care how much experience you have, if you can't get your feet down on the ground to save yourself, especially on a big heavy bike like this, it's just not really a good feeling. Now don't get me wrong, I've definitely had this bike on some pretty intense terrain, and if you guys missed those videos, I took this out to the Tigerton single track on the Embarrassed River ATV trail land, and those are some pretty crazy trails for a bike this big. And honestly, it handled it really pretty darn well. The other thing that really kind of starts to end up hurting towards the end of a long ride is my wrists, and that's due to the lack of sweep that these stock bars have. Sweep is basically the amount of angle that the handlebars have after they reach their kind of high bend point here. Now if you look at the way my arms and wrists are positioned here, my arm kind of goes down straight and then my wrists sort of shoot off that direction. Now you wouldn't really think that that would bother you, but after riding like this for, like I said, 3-4 hours, this really puts quite the strain on your joints. Now for those of you that were following the channel last year, you might remember that I tried some rocks risers on the Tenere. That definitely helped a bit because it kind of reduced the angle that my wrists were at because the bars were a little bit closer to me, so my arms are a little bit more spread out at the point that they got to the bars. But it still just wasn't enough. What we're gonna be doing here is the Tusk 1 1/8 Chub bar. This is the YZ bend that I'm going with. After we get the stock bars off of here, I will kind of set them up next to each other so I can show you just exactly what this YZ bend is gonna get you compared to the stock set. And to protect both my levers and my hands, we're gonna be installing my new favorite handguards here. These are the Tusk D-Flex. Absolutely phenomenal handguard. I've got these on the TW200. Dropped that a couple times already. Absolutely no issues. Forgot one step in the process here. I feel better already. So obviously there isn't a huge difference here, definitely noticeable, but I think there is kind of a fine line between having too much bend and having not enough. And on those long days, I think this little bit of extra bend that I've got here is going to be much more comfortable. And there's two other big differences that you might have already noticed here between these bars, and that's that the stock ones are going to have these little locating holes here. Now, these can be re-drilled in your new bars, but personally I like to kind of play around with a lot of different angles when I stick a new set of bars on here, and I don't want to be stuck with just one set of holes to pick from. Now feel free to disagree with me down in the comment section there, but what I prefer to do is just clip those nubs off. So as you can see, I've already got this one removed here, and the reason those nubs are already clipped off is that this is actually the second set of Tusk bars that I'm going to be trying on this bike. The first set I sort of miscalculated and didn't really pay attention to the fact that my control length needed to be pretty long, and then what that means is basically from the end of the bar to the first bend here. And as you can see, the stock bar has a bit more room than even this YZ bend does. Originally what I tried on here was the CR high bend, and that had an even shorter distance here. Now to compensate for that, I could have just trimmed down my control levers a bit here, but what ended up being kind of the big showstopper is actually the throttle tube. Now I could slide this on to a point where I could almost feel comfortable with a non-gloved hand. With a gloved hand, I couldn't quite get this on far enough. Luckily, Rocky Mountain ATV was nice enough to send me a second set, so let's make sure this one fits. You've got to be kidding me. So I really thought with that little bit of extra control room here, and I guess I say a little bit, I think it's like a 1/4 inch, that this was going to be okay. And it seems like everything does fit on here a lot better. I'm not really sure what's going on with this. Obviously, we can't leave it that way, so I think I'm going to pull this back off and sand it down. Still no luck here. Sanded the absolute shit out of this thing down to bare metal, maybe even removed a little bit of metal. It's nice and smooth. Really always thought this had something to do with the bars because they're 1 1/8" here and they taper down to 7/8. I thought maybe some of that was spilling over past this bend here. After I kind of got sick of trying to remove material here, I decided to maybe just try to remove a little bit from the inside of this plastic throttle tube, thinking that would be easier. And I started with this side, and if you notice, it's actually nice and loose there. I'm not sure how that was to begin with, but it turns out that it's actually not the bar's fault, it's Yamaha's. For some reason, this throttle tube tapers down at the end. And that's what was locking it up this whole time. So I need to trim a bit of the end of this off anyways, so I think I'm gonna do that and just see what that does for me. So what I ended up doing is sanding the inside of this down with some 400 grit, then moved to 600, and then went to a 1500 grit just to make sure it's nice and smooth. And it seems like that definitely did the trick. This drops on like perfectly now. One thing to note too is that it is definitely not the bar's fault here. I think these are 7/8 all the way through, even where the coating is on there still. When I slide this end on, rotates nice and smooth all the way up to the bend. However, when I spin this around, even though I've got this sanded down, you can tell it gets hung up on there already. So definitely pick up a new throttle tube if you're going to pick up these bars, either that or be ready to do a lot of sanding. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. So we've got everything mounted up more or less how it was when I took it apart to begin with the exception of the way that I got these cables routed. So I'm not really sure if it's something to do with the bend of the bars or where I have this placed. I really don't get it. But with the throttle cables out in front of the brake line here, when I would go to turn the bars, the adjustment point here would crash into my dash here, so I'm not really sure what the deal is. Hopefully that won't happen on your bike. Definitely not recommending you run the cables like this, but it seems like that does work. So you guys saw me nip the end of this off here, and I did actually snip the end of this grip off to match as well. But it turns out I may not have needed to do that at all. I probably could have left those long. And that's because I've got these extra long bolts and this spacer here that's actually gonna match the diameter of the bar end. So I think that probably would have been just fine. Not really a huge deal either way. So earlier I mentioned that these are my new favorite handguards, and this isn't the main reason, but it's definitely something that I really like about these compared to the Bark Busters. On those, when you go to put this plastic piece on, you actually have to thread something that looks similar to a wood screw into a notch that they put inside of the aluminum portion. But on these Tusk guards, the holes are actually threaded, and you just get a regular fastener that threads right in here. So much easier. Get a little bit of blue Loctite just to be sure. So I'll grab my right side here along with the one marked R, and we'll get this mounted up. And I don't need this tightened down yet because there's going to be a lot of wiggle room and a lot of adjusting that we're going to have to do. First, we're going to slide this piece into the bar end. Then I'll grab my little spacer here. That'll go right in between these two. Slide my long bolt in. Yeah, it looks like I would have had plenty of room for my long grips. So if you guys have ever installed a set of handguards, it doesn't really matter what brand they were. You know that they never really quite fit up right to begin with. And on this set, it's looking like I'm gonna have to bend this piece out a little ways just to make sure that that's gonna fit up on the bar correctly. So again, what I'm gonna be doing here is increasing this bend. So this piece I want down just a hair more. I've had people kind of cringe, I think, when they see me do this, and I mean, obviously you don't want to be bending this back and forth a whole bunch of times. I don't know, I'm just really not all that worried about it. I think it'll be okay. After a few tweaks, I'm feeling pretty good about how this all lines up with the bars and the mounts. So basically what I'm going to do now is just kind of attach everything, leave everything a bit loose, and then just kind of jostle all around until it looks like it's in a good spot. What I try to do is put this aluminum bar right in front of my brake levers, so that way if the bike goes down, they're perfectly protected. And of course you want to check the operation of your levers too, to make sure they're not going to get bound up on your guards. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that you're going to be really close to your connection for your brake line here. Now, mine's not touching. Obviously, if this gets bumped, that definitely could be interacting with that, which obviously would not be a good thing, but because Yamaha's got this goofy little pin that hangs down here, there just isn't a whole lot I can do. I can't really have this any lower than this, otherwise it's bumping into that. But that's definitely something you want to keep an eye on if you ever lay the bike down. Make sure that that's not leaking. Make sure none of our wires or lines are bound up or pinched anywhere. The other thing that I like to do is make sure that these are going to give me optimal wind blockage for my hands, since I do ride in some kind of cold weather, and it does almost seem like maybe I would want these tilted up just a bit. But I think until I get that other side assembled, I'm just going to kind of leave this all loose, and then once that side's done, I can kind of reassess and decide if I want to tilt my bars or move anything else around. So we've got everything mounted up here. Pretty happy with how that all went together. The clutch side was a lot easier. Not as much to kind of dance around over here like we had on the brake side. One thing to keep in mind with these brackets is that there is kind of a sweet spot between this bend and this bend, because this is where you're going from larger diameter to the smaller diameter. So I would say just kind of pick that spot to begin with this cap off, and you'll be able to tell pretty easily where that's supposed to go. Again, lining these up with your levers and ensuring that there's nothing that's gonna keep them from extending all the way. This looks like it does just barely touch, but I'm already bottomed out there. And while fully extending this way is of course important, so you're not dragging the clutch all the time when you're riding, pulling it back this way is also something that you want to check. So as long as you're bottoming out on the bar here before you're bottoming out over here, then you know you're okay. Again, making sure none of my electrical lines are pinched, making sure that this is plenty of free play, no issues when we go lock all the way one way and all the way the other. So now there's really only one thing left to do. That feels so much better. And this all just really looks cool too. I don't know what it is. I think it's just maybe the black and silver really just looks nice up there. I'm really very happy with how this all came together. Like I said, definitely all fit up pretty easy. You do always kind of need to mess with the guards a little bit, of course, but even that really wasn't too big of a deal. All fit up with very little bending, and definitely happy with the finished product here. I will be getting out and doing a road test on these as soon as I can, and then once the snow is melted off in the woods, and maybe even before that, we'll get out and see if we can't beat these up a little bit. And of course, before I head out on the first ride, I'm going to make sure that every single fastener that I touch today is snug down tight. I will probably throw blue Loctite on the guard fasteners at least, if not maybe some of the OEM fasteners, just to be sure. Like I said, if you want to see those videos where I'm out testing this thing and enjoying the beautiful trails here in Wisconsin, make sure you hit that subscribe button, click that bell after you subscribe. That way to let you know anytime I put a video out. Other than that, guys, if you want to pick some of this stuff up, make sure you take a look down in the description. Big thanks to Rocky Mountain ATV for sending this stuff out to me. If you guys use those links down there, it won't cost you anything extra, but Rocky Mountain ATV sends a little bit my way. Definitely appreciate that. Makes this whole YouTube thing quite a bit more economical, so I really appreciate that. Other than that, guys, if you can get out, enjoy this beautiful world, make sure you do that today. And hey, if you can't, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime.